in terms of how they could add value to food and nutrition systems, in improving on our food security, but also in delivering new products for our food systems. This morning, we have a number of our panelists that are going to give us some insights in respect of this particular subject area. We have Professor Hetty Schoenfeld, and we also have Professor Bradley Fletch, who will then be followed by Dr. Itumile Matle, and Dr. Nomusa Lamini, and Dr. Michael Byro. Just briefly, Professor Hetty Schoenfeld will start and give us a 10-minute rendition in terms of the key issues. Her focus is on linking nutrient quality and quantity of foods for sustainable food systems towards attaining nutrition and food security for all. She is an advocate for nutrition research, promoting excellence through the creation, translation, and dissemination of science-based information into policies, programs, and training. Hetty, now the floor is yours to start with your presentation, and then you'll be followed by Professor Bradley Fletch.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moephuli. And I'm going to talk about improved nutrition for good health, and welcome everyone here. We know that moderate or severe food insecurity has been climbing slowly for at least 6 years, but from 2019 to 2020, an increase of almost 320 people is reported in just 1 year. And this number can increase even more due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if we look at this slide, we can see that Africa, in fact, is doing the worst of all the other continents. So the nutrition indicators for children under the age of 5, we have 3 phases. First of all, stunting, where children are too short for the age, and that is by far the most, 144 million children. Then wasting, where children are too thin for their height, which is at least 47 million. And then overweight, which is to us quite a matter of concern, with 38 million children being reported as being overweight. The actual figures, particularly for stunting and wasting, are expected to be higher due to the effects of COVID-19, as disruptions to essential nutrition interventions and negative impacts on dietary patterns were experienced. Now, if we look at adult obesity globally, we can see that this is an increase at a rapid pace worldwide in all continents. Although Africa is following the pattern of the world, for South Africa in particularly, 41% of our South African women were already reported as either overweight or obese. So what are the drivers of food insecurity? We know that climate and natural disasters are one of the factors that cause food insecurity, as well as economic shocks, poverty, political instability, and conflict. And together with conflict and climate shocks, it also affects economic growth and therefore indirectly affects undernourishment and vice versa. Now, if we think about the agricultural system and human health and food security, the high incidence of overweight and obesity and non-communicable diseases such as heart disease and diabetes is associated with a high energy consumed in the diet. A low intake of essential nutrients is associated with low dietary variety and quality, and the high prevalence of undernutrition is associated with low dietary quantity and quality. So what are our challenges? Is it enough food and energy or enough nutrients? So while the exact makeup of a healthy diet varies depending on individual characteristics, as well as cultural context, locally available foods and dietary customs to the basic principles of what constitutes a healthy diet are the same. The diets of the poor in developing countries usually consist of very high amounts of staple foods such as maize, wheat, and rice, but few micronutrient-rich foods such as fruits, vegetables, and animal products. And healthier diets, we know today, cost more, and it contributes to differences in dietary quality across socioeconomic strata. 57% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia are reporting to say that they cannot afford a healthy diet. So diets which contain ultra-processed food, which supply a high percentage of total energy intake, may be cheaper than diets that contain less ultra-processed food. But the availability and affordability of these ultra-processed food can explain, at least partly, the shift towards unhealthy dietary patterns. But will Africa be able to deliver on the SDGs? So key components to maintain health is, first of all, maintain a healthy body weight by exercising and watch what you eat. The quantity and the quality of our diet have changed across our populations because of urbanization and class mobility. There's a decrease in energy intake and an increase in energy expenditure for which we must strive for. But the responsibility should be shared among consumers, manufacturers, advertisers, healthcare providers, and government to provide a balanced, healthy diet. So in order to have economic access to healthy and sustainable diets, there are policies and practices that can be implemented, such as decreasing less healthy ingredients, making unhealthy food more expensive, increasing food, and subsidize healthier. Fiscal policy interventions can influence consumer purchasing behavior, which show that at least a 12% increase in consumption for every 10% decrease in price. And low fruit and vegetable intake is one of our largest risk factors for non-communicable diseases, where South Africans, for instance, are eating only half the amount which is recommended by the WHO. And low intake of fruits and vegetables can result in low dietary fiber intake and deficiencies of micronutrients that can also compromise our immune system. The consumption of fruits and vegetables is also lower in rural and informal urban areas than in urban areas. And for instance, policy that was adopted in South Africa was the tax exemption of basic foodstuffs. A list that we, in fact, would promote to increase, to make food more affordable. We should also strengthen the nutrition knowledge of the population through nutrition education at all levels, using our food-based dietary guidelines and mass media campaigns. We can have behavior-changing interventions. We should increase the awareness of the nutritional advantages of indigenous and underutilized crops and wild foods, and promote traditional food culture and preparation techniques. So in conclusion, price decreases or subsidies and price increases, such as taxes, can significantly alter consumption of targeted foods. And strategies to improve health should also include behavior changes, strategies to increase people's physical activity levels, decrease their inactivity, improve eating behavior, reduce energy intake, and improve dietary quality. And so these improvements in diets are crucial for population health and sustainable livelihoods. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Professor Schofield, for that presentation. We will now move on to Professor Bradley Fletch. Professor Fletch is a crop disease researcher at the Agricultural Research Council. He also works on the development of an integrated pest management system, with a focus on local high-value crops such as maize, sorghum, and groundnuts. Professor Fletch, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Moephuli. Yeah, I'm going to be talking on mycotoxins of maize. Most of our work has been in Southern Africa, so I'll focus on that. And I'll go through, explain what are mycotoxins, why they're important, and end off with maybe what we are doing about it. Okay, maize is an important staple food in South Africa, with consumption levels reaching as high as 40 and 500 grams per person per day. And so maize ear rots can result in yield losses and grain quality losses, and then the production of mycotoxins, which influence the health and safety of the consumers. Just to explain, for any disease triangle to occur, three aspects are necessary to combine to cause a disease. First being the pathogen, the next being the environment, and then the next being a susceptible host. And when these combine together, the disease forms. When the disease forms, certain pathogens are known to produce these mycotoxins, which are also basically affected by these three factors. To just give you an idea of what they look like, the top left-hand corner is maize with aflatoxin infection. On the right is maize with Fusarium verticilloides, which produces fumonisms. At the bottom left is Fusarium graminearum species complex, which produces deoxynivalenol and zearalenone. And then right bottom is aflatoxins of groundnuts. In South Africa, aflatoxin on maize is not a problem. We get very low levels. However, on groundnuts, it's very relevant. So what are mycotoxins? They are secondary metabolites that are basically produced by fungi in food crops. They cause mycotoxicosis in animals and humans. They can contaminate food and feed through either fungal growth prior to and during harvest, or due to improper storage. And different pathogens are affected differently in these two stages. So the toxicity of mycotoxins can be acute or chronic and result in disorders in the digestive system, pulmonary edema and leukoencephalomalacia in horses and pigs, reproductive dysfunctions, things like precocious puberty, deterioration of liver or kidney function, immune suppression, cancer of the liver and esophagus, and birth defects and neural tube defects. And this is caused by a number of the mycotoxins. Just to give you an idea, the top left-hand corner is leukoencephalomalacia. It's on a horse's brain. You can see the red lesions on there that are caused by fumonisms. On the right is pulmonary edema, which is caused on pigs, caused by deoxynivalenol. The bottom left is cancer on kidneys, mouse kidneys, and that's caused by fumonisms. And then the bottom right is a picture showing spina bifida, which is a lack of development of the backbone and it happens in humans and in animals, caused by fumonisms. So why are they important? Because they affect the entire chain of food and feed production, reduction of marketable grain, increased cost of drying of grain, decreased weight gain in animal feeding, fertility problems, particularly caused by the mycotoxin zearalenone, which is an estrogenic effect, and increased costs for animal health. They're toxic to humans and animals, as I mentioned, and they restrict markets for developing countries, particularly export markets to the European and Western markets. This is just to give you an idea of the different mycotoxins on what they can affect just on a pig. You can see aflatoxin and fumonisin causing hepatitis, vomitoxin, which causes feed rejection, oral irritations, fumonisins causing lung edema, ochratoxin and citrinin, and then the zearalenone, vulvovaginitis, and prolapse uterus, and embryo mortality. So the most important mycotoxins in Africa are initially the aflatoxins, which occur in maize and peanuts, and they cause the aflatoxin B1, B2, and there's a series of other mycotoxins, but these two being the most important. And then the trichothecenes are produced by Fusarium graminearum species complex. They are maize, wheat, and barley. They produce deoxynivalenol and nivalenol. Then the zearalenone, as I mentioned earlier, produced by Fusarium graminearum, it causes an estrogenic effect on animals and on people. And then finally, the fumonisins, which in Southern Africa were probably the most important until just recently. The graminearum, Fusarium graminearum complex has been on the increase. And these cause the FB1, FB2, and FB3. The production of mycotoxins, the incident and extent of mycotoxin contamination depend on geographical and seasonal factors, cultivation practices, harvesting practices, storage, and transportation. The factors affecting the production, temperature, humidity, and the extent of physical damage to the commodity. And then severity of mycotoxicosis depends on toxicity of the mycotoxin, the extent of exposure to the toxin, age, health, and nutritional status of the infected animal or human, and synergistic effects of all compounds to which individual has been exposed may occur. A fungus that produces a toxin can vary greatly from low toxicity to high toxicity. It's an inherent function of the DNA of a specific isolate. So incidence and severity of mycotoxins. Subsistence farmers depend on products irrespective of contamination. In Kenya, it's been shown many people have had problems with aflatoxicosis due to them not having alternative foodstuffs. Commercial farmers do have some sort of control system in progress and place through the grading regulations. Some Fusarium species may be asymptomatic and not always picked up in the grading system, and these slip through into the feedstuffs. Interventions are essential to ensure food safety. The primary means of toxin production and the potential control and production process, cultural practices, optimal planting and harvest time, insect control by BT and insecticides, biological control, fungicide resistance. And at the ARC, at grain crops, we have covered all these in pretty much detail, and we are still hoping to elucidate IPM systems. Post-harvest, mycotoxins, legislation on limiting the legal allowable limits of mycotoxins is very effective. The removal of damaged and rotted kernels by careful adjustment of a combine or grading regulations or grade cleaning. Secondary means of toxin production, proper drying and storage, and heating and detoxification, but these are not always effective. Research at the ARC is focused on integrated control. And here we have looked at the incidence and spread of the pathogens and mycotoxins, recent increases in the Fusarium graminearum species complex, identification of resistant lines, cropping systems and their effect on different mycotoxins, climate plays a major role on the incidence of mycotoxins. Epidemiological models, prediction models we've been working on, and then the role of BT. We found BT to be effective in reducing mycotoxins, plant stress reduction, and finally chemical control was looked at. However, chemical control was not effective. I'd like to thank you all for your time and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Fletch, for that presentation. We hope you'll be on hand to deal with the questions that might be arising, especially when there's a panel discussion. We'll now move on to a presentation by Dr. Itumeleng Matle, who has a PhD in agriculture from the University from UNISA, with over 12 years of experience in the field of veterinary bacteriology and food safety. He is also a graduate of the Central University of Technology with a focus on environmental health. Dr. Matle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Moephuli. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Itumeleng, as I've been introduced. This morning, I'll be dealing with a topic on foodborne pathogen with a special emphasis on microbial communities of meat and meat products, an investigation of the microbiological meat safety at selected enterprise in South Africa. We know that Section 27 of our Constitution indicate that everybody in South Africa has the right.
Please put your presentation on slideshow.
Oh, it's not on slideshow. My apologies for that. Is it on slideshow, Sam?
We can see the slides, but I think if you press that slideshow thing, it'll just then show it as a full slide.
Oh, I have no idea what's happening here. I pressed the slideshow thing.
No, it went back to your, at the top there, you see something that says slideshow.
Okay.
There's animations and then the slideshow. Next animation is the slideshow. If you press that, it should come through.
Yes, I did that.
Then you go to from current slide presentation.
Is that fine now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Then you can click for it to continue.
Okay. Yes. Apologies about that. What I was saying was that it is engraved in our constitution that everybody in the country has the right to sufficient amount of safe and nutritious food in order for us to sustain our life and promote health. However, when we talk about the concept of food safety, it's an umbrella term that encompasses many facets in the value chain of food, which include food processing, production, handling, and label in order to prevent diseases occurring in humans. And food safety is generally characterized in three categories or aspects, which is chemical, microphysical, and microbiological food safety, which my focus this morning will be on microbiological food safety. What do we mean about chemical? We are saying food should be free from chemicals that can cause disease in humans, or physical objects that can cause disease or damage in humans. And they must be free from bacteria, viruses that has a potential to cause disease in humans. It is known that unsafe food containing pathogenic bacteria, viruses, or parasites cause more than 200 diseases, which range from self-limiting diarrhea to more severe illnesses, particularly in susceptible populations such as children, people with immunocompromised. And annually, foodborne pathogens, they cause over 6 million cases with over 400,000 deaths. And majority of these deaths occur in Africa because we have a high burden of foodborne diseases in Africa and part of them in Asia. So what is the landscape of foodborne pathogen in South Africa? We know that foodborne pathogens in South Africa contribute to public health problems. Apart from the recent listeriosis outbreak, which had high morbidity and mortality rate, NICD between 2017 and 18 reported over 300 foodborne outbreaks with more than 2,000 cases and 20 deaths. We're also aware that foodborne pathogens, they are have serious socio-economical implications. The listeriosis outbreak cost pork industry more than 200 million of production losses. This does not include possible legal actions, closure of factories, and downward costs that were incurred by the industry and by the country. We also know that foodborne pathogens, they threaten food security because food safety, nutrition, and security are linked. And most of these foodborne pathogens can damage or cause food spoilage, which can reduce the availability and access to food and subsequently increase the cost of food. We know that the presence of foodborne pathogens in a food can lead to food recall and contamination of food product that can lead to shortage of food. And these foodborne pathogens, they are also implicated in outbreaks that may result in massive food losses. And we also know that in South Africa, foodborne pathogens pose a serious international threat to international trade. If you take the outbreak of listeriosis that happened in 2008, when the products were recalled, they were already sent to over 15 other countries in the continent, and we needed international response to recalling of those food products. And they also lead to reputational damage of a country, of a product, of a brand. So this foodborne pathogen, they have serious implications. So what do we know about them in South Africa? So in order for us to prevent, detect, and manage the risk associated with foodborne pathogen so that we can contribute to food security, human health, and economical prosperity, and access to market and tourism, we need to understand the landscape of food pathogens that are circulating in our food product in South Africa. So they need to be a national surveillance study that can give us the baseline data of what's happening in the country. So between 2018 and 2020, we conducted a study together with the Department of Agriculture in National Department to determine the prevalence of major foodborne bacterial pathogens in meat and meat product in South Africa and those that are being imported into the country. We focus on Yersinia enterocolitica, Salmonella, Listeria, Campylobacter, Staph aureus, Clostridium perfringens, E. coli, Bacillus, and Clostridium botulinum. These pathogens are known to be the major causes of foodborne outbreaks in the world. At the same time, we wanted to assess the ability of the next generation sequencing to be incorporated in as a tool in food surveillance or food safety surveillance. We also wanted to identify the trends and the challenges and opportunity to improve foodborne pathogen surveillance in the country. So what then we did as an ARC at that particular time, we conducted a cross-sectional study whereby we collected 2,070 meat products from across 9 provinces in the country and from major ports of entry in the country from countries that are importing to South Africa. And these products cover different meat types, animal species, and they come from different establishments in the country. So the science that we use in dealing with identification and applications of sequences and all that which we use are well published. You can follow that link if you are interested in the science behind what we did, which I'm not gonna go into it because of time. So what we found, which was interesting for us, it was that in this study, Staphylococcus aureus, Yersinia enterocolitica, Clostridium perfringens, and Listeria monocytogenes had the highest frequency of occurrence. And these pathogens are not routinely tested in our veterinary and clinical diagnostic laboratory and some of public health laboratory from food and food sample. This might be the reason why we have so much high prevalence of them in the country. And if you study the global trend of foodborne pathogen, you'll realize that Yersinia enterocolitica is the 4th ranking pathogen globally in terms of causing disease. In some countries, Clostridium perfringens is a serious foodborne pathogen, and we have seen the consequences of not monitoring Listeria monocytogenes in the recent outbreak in the country, and so as Staph aureus. We also looked at their distribution among different food product and establishment. And what we came up across is that we need the presence of this pathogen in our meat product. They highlight the importance of implementing One Health approach for multifaceted, transdisciplinary, collaborative strategies from the people that are dealing with the environment to animal health professions, and at the same time to our public health people, and standardize the testing protocols across these different sectors to minimize the risk. Because there are many studies in South Africa that are done around foodborne pathogens, but there's no standardization of method, and there is limited information from this study from 3 different sectors like the environment, animal health, and humans in terms of their distribution. So our study highlighted that there's a need for that to be included in our strategy of foodborne control. What we also did, which was important in terms of metagenomics of the next generation sequence, we had a subsample of our samples that we tested, and we found that we had DNA signature of 114 different genera of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And of concern to us was the presence of viral DNA signature, because in South Africa currently, virus foodborne pathogens, particularly neurovirus, are not routinely offered, and the prevalence and the distribution in food and food product is not necessarily known. So the application of metagenomics was able to give us an indication of what are we missing by concentrating only on bacteria and parasite, what other viruses or what other microorganisms are in circulation in our food product, and this can cause a serious problem. If you study the global patterns, you'll find that neuroviruses are among the most prevalent or causes of foodborne outbreaks in the world. And since they are not offered in South Africa, even in routine clinical diagnostics, we don't even know whether their presence does exist or not in the country. But whole genome sequence and especially metagenomics shed the light into their presence, possible presence in our food product. And the other thing that was interesting that in our study that we find, we also said, since we have isolates that are coming from different countries into South Africa, let us look at genomic comparison of what we're picking from the meat that have been imported into the country and compare it with what we have in the country. And we've seen a couple of things that are important. We've seen the introduction of new strains of Salmonella doubling into the country. We isolated this strain in 2016 when we're doing time scale phylogeny. We see that this strain clustered with those that are coming from America, and also we also seen the same thing with Salmonella harda and Enteritidis. What was concerning from us, it was not the introduction of these strains, it was what they were carrying, which they carried resistant genes that our isolates in the country do not have. And some of those resistant genes they are carrying, they code resistance to a wide range of antibiotics. So since antibiotic resistant genes can be transferred between pathogens, this is concerning for us in terms of the foodborne pathogens. And what we also picked up was, okay, the trends and the challenges and the opportunity. There has to be an active foodborne surveillance program in the country because it's a critical component of food safety. And we should focus our attention primarily to viral foodborne pathogens because they are not being surveyed, and also extend the scope of food matrices to include vegetables and foods for surveillance, because this part also, it's important to transmit foodborne pathogen, and they are not being surveyed in the country. And if you look at organizations such as SARC, that has animal health and crop campuses, the collaboration can happen there that can provide baseline study on animals and vegetables surveillance. And what we also picked up is that there's a need for rapid and broad spectrum testing assays. This is important because currently there's heavy reliance on classical microbiological techniques to do isolation of foodborne pathogens. And these techniques, they take time, they are laborious, and their sensitivity to a certain extent is questionable. Because why do we need rapid technique? Is because rapid techniques are important for swift detection of foodborne pathogen in food product to prevent possible outbreaks and the spread of disease. And if you are a business operator, you need a rapid test to monitor the presence of these pathogens in your facility before the product can hit the market, and also to comply with local legislation. For people that are importing and exporting, it is important to have rapid tests before you send your product to another country, or once an inspection is done at the border, to prevent the cost of storage and product being condemned. And this test will help in quick or rapid identification of microbiological assays that are there. And we propose that the application of whole genome sequencing, especially metagenomics, since the cost of sequencing is decreasing globally, can offer us an opportunity for rapid identification of this foodborne pathogen. And also we can combine the molecular and classical microbiological assay to get a better turnaround time to identifying this foodborne pathogen for us to quickly respond if a need arises. And we also propose that there should be a drive or educational awareness about foodborne safety or food safety, because majority of outbreaks that are happening in South Africa, they happen primarily at a household setting where food education is not practiced in the home, or there's a lack of it. We also propose One Health approach where we can have multi-disciplinary engagement from the environmentalist to public health people to veterinary people in how to handle the spread of foodborne pathogens in the country. And for that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Matle, for that presentation. We will now move on to requesting a presentation by Dr. Nomusa Dlamini, who is a principal research scientist at the CSIR, specializing in food sciences and technologies. He is currently also the acting manager for the food safety program at the CSIR. Dr. Dlamini.
Thank you, Dr. Moephuli. I would like to share my presentation. Good afternoon to the, can you see my presentation? I think it's on slideshow. Yes, okay. So I'm presenting on food safety and improved nutrition for good health. As I've been introduced, I'll present on this topic. And basically, I will not focus too much on the topics that have been covered. I'll just focus on some of the other topics that relate to food safety. It's been mentioned that food security is closely linked to food safety plus nutrition. And we know that with nutrition, it is critical. It is a critical part of health and development. For instance, WHO actually states that better nutrition is related to improved infant, child, and maternal health, and also stronger immune systems. It also lowers longevity in terms of lowering the risk of non-communicable diseases as an adult, in terms of diabetes and other cardiovascular diseases. As mentioned, there's high risk of foodborne diseases, and consumers are now demanding healthier food as well as quality products that are prepackaged and ready-made options. Toxins, pesticides, and other pathogens have been reported. There's also advances in food testing systems or technologies, which are cheaper, faster, and efficient. Also, we have increased globalization of our food supply, where an outbreak in one region of the world will lead to disease in another part of the world, which is another geographic region. There's also stringent. Basically, these are meant to monitor things like food fraud, whether the food is authentic, also other food safety and modernization activities that have led to demand in food safety. When we're looking at the African continent, we find that Africa suffers the world's worst levels of food safety, which causes human capital losses of an estimated cost of 16.7 billion a year, which is quite huge in terms of loss in revenue, health, and other factors as well. In terms of global food testing systems, if we segment them, we find that pathogen testing is the highest, followed by authenticity. You want to prove if your product is authentic. If you're saying it's olive oil, is it really olive oil? If you're saying your meat is beef, is it really beef? We had a scandal a few years ago where horse meat was substituted for beef meat or mixed with beef meat. Also, there's also GM testing where some consumers might not like it. And also pesticide and residues and mycotoxin testing, as well as allergen testing. Mycotoxin mycotoxin testing is actually very important, especially when it comes to Africa, as mentioned. Our environment favors development of this fungi that then contribute to mycotoxin testing, which results in the need for that. In terms of the African initiatives in food testing systems, we find that we've got the African Food Safety Network, we've got the AOAC, which is the Sub-Saharan region, which was launched a few years ago. We also have the SADC Regional Laboratory Association, as well as partnership. My apologies to the audience. My laptop just crashed. I don't know, for some reason. Okay, I was on slide that Africa is doing, has initiative to ensure that our food is safe. And then I was moving on to the slide where we're looking at how mycotoxins are a challenge because of our environmental conditions. We find that mycotoxins can actually, exposure over a long time can result in liver cancer. Also, it can lead to failure of growth in children, and which also manifests itself as malnutrition because nutrient absorption is also affected. In terms of the initiatives at CSIR, we have several initiatives on food safety. One of them is actually assisting in the control and monitoring of mycotoxins, which is important. We are producing high purity and verified mycotoxins that can be used as standards. And we are working with the National Meteorological Institute of South Africa, NIMISA, in terms of verifying those mycotoxins and distribution. We're also busy with some of point of care or on-site testing systems for mycotoxins and other pathogens in the food, other pathogens that are found in the food. We also have assisting in terms of food testing along the value chain through mobile food testing facilities, which should be accredited. For this one, we've partnered with an SME that currently is providing training to be accredited and to be able to test that you can monitor them. Some of them are nanocomposites, which can be formulated into packaging of the food that's slowing down spoilage or also extending shelf life. Also, it reduces the use of plastics in the food industry. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dlamini. So we'll move on to the next presenter. I think I had not introduced myself. So I'm Farai Muchadeyi from the Agricultural Research Council, and Dr. Moephuli, I'm taking over from Dr. Moephuli from co-chairing this session. So our next presenter will be Dr. Michael Bairu from the Agricultural Research Council, and you'll talk to us on biodiversity and indigenous genetic resources on improved nutritional value chains. Dr. Bairu was having challenges, so if you are ready, can I load your presentation, Dr. Michael?
Farai, I was just talking to him on the phone.
Yeah.
He was having a challenge with his microphone. Can we maybe change some of the speakers around, or is that not possible?
Yeah, so Dr. Bairu was the last speaker. So maybe we can do some discussions. We can open up for a few discussions whilst we wait for him to come on board.
Okay, I'll check with him again now. I thought there was still one speaker after him. Let me just check with him again.
Okay, no, that's fine. So whilst we wait for Dr. Bairu, I'll just open up the session for a few discussion points. We are also waiting for questions to come in from the host, the Secretariat BioAfrica, and would share them with the panelists as we go along. But maybe if I can just ask, I think I would push this question towards Prof. Hatim. If you can shed a little bit more light on maybe what you see as the innovations that are required to transform these food systems, maybe through new products, processes, but looking at them trying to achieve food nutrition and security.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I personally believe that it is very important that all of us work together to improve the food system, from the growth and planting of high quality foods, such as biofortified crops as one example, where you already have embedded in the food, such as the orange flesh sweet potato, the high beta carotene that is required for eyesight. And we know that vitamin A, iron, and zinc is the 3 micronutrients of real concern in the developing world and in Africa and East Asia. So, and we do know about the program that has been running very successfully for many years at the ARC Roodeplaat, but it has to be institutionalized within the Department of Agricultural program as well. Perhaps it has already, that I'm just not aware to what extent it has already become part of that. But that is one very effective way to reach a very large part of your population. And we have good results from Mozambique, where those kind of programs really were able to address vitamin A deficiency.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Haiti. So maybe if I can pass the same question to the other panelists, but looking more at, if we look, Prof. Fletch, you shared on microtoxins, and Dr. Mahle on foodborne pathogens. Then the question is, what are the products and innovations that would ensure that are available and accessible to the general public to ensure that food is safe, maybe in relation to mycotoxins, but also in relation to food pathogens? So if we can start with Prof. Bradley Fletch.
Yeah, sorry. There are not very many available avenues to share this information. I think that it's necessary that information be shared, particularly with subsistence farmers who basically are forced to eat their product that they produce, and then also the introduction of legal limits. But at this stage, we do share information through popular articles, various farmers' days, presentations, and that type of thing. But I do not think that there's enough being done.
Okay, thank you. And I hear Dr. Bairu is ready to share, but before we move on to him and lose this discussion point, Dr. Mahle and Dr. Dlamini, any comments on that, on products and innovations in South Africa and Africa in general? Dr. Mahle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In South Africa and Africa global, generally, there hasn't been much of innovation to detect foodborne pathogen outside the laboratory settings. However, if you look in Europe, there has been a move to develop rapid kits that the producers can have an idea of surface contamination in their food producing facility. And much has not been used in South Africa and Africa, and simply because of legislation, because food pathogens or food safety in terms of microbiological analysis is a very controlled field in South Africa, and there is no legal framework to use any innovation other than the lab to test for the presence of those pathogens. However, there are tools that are available in other parts of the world that can be used in South Africa. And the other thing that I also want to add about that, from a lab point of view, there's still a heavy reliance on traditional microbiological methods to detect this pathogen, and we should seek to move towards sequence-based analysis. But again, you have to deal with the legislation framework to permit that happening in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Dlamini, do you have anything to say? And whilst you give us that, Dr. Bairu, if you can so long load your presentation.
Okay. No, thank you for that. In terms of the work that we're doing at CSIR, in terms of pathogen testing and also testing for microtoxins, we're working on several technologies that involve microfluidics mechanics with the next generation health and as well as chemicals cluster. So those are still in development. Although we have some imported, there's some kits that can be imported overseas that that can sort of detect on site, at least enable a producer or a grain producer to establish whether their grains is within limits or is outside the limits, for example, of aflatoxins, because we have mostly aflatoxin and fumonosin kits, but other kits haven't been manufactured. And what we're doing at CSIR, we're trying to localize the production of those kits using local companies. Yeah, we've applied for funding and we are waiting the outcomes for that.
Thank you. So again, welcome, Dr. Bairu, and you are going to give us your talk on, or your input and discussion points on biodiversity and indigenous genetic resources for improved food and nutritional value chain. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and apologies, colleagues, for the technological hiccup. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Thanks.
All right, I think I'll try and go through a few slides as quickly as I can. I think, as you could see, I've been asked to provide feedback on what we are doing in terms of introducing our indigenous food diversity into the food system. But first, it's imperative we look into, I think, what determines food value chains in a broader scheme of things. I think while I was preparing for this talk, I think I've seen a few very interesting as well as worrying signs on food consumption patterns. I think we also need to look into the overall state of our food system, determinants, access to markets, means as well as modes of production, our public perception, consciousness, as well as our food cultures really affects our food value chains as well. The production and distribution networks are also very important, accompanied with the relevant policies. I think, in addition, our aptitude for the adoption of new crops is also important in terms of broadening our base. Within the food consumption pattern, some very good work was done over a 30-year period, I think, from the Cambridge University, which was published in Lancet. In 1990, they measured food consumption pattern of 187 countries. Based on more healthy items, you could see the world is not that great. even from the 1990s, there are less healthy items are consumed. But when we look into the consumption of unhealthy items, Africa and Asia seems to be doing well in terms of consuming less of unhealthy things. But the general trend shows in 1990, Africa was in a better space compared to most of the world. But fast forward 30 years down the line, there was a significant role reversal where the good turned bad and the bad is improving a lot. Looking into very specific consumption pattern of unhealthy diets, unlike 1990, 30 years ago, now Africa has a complete reversal. It was very green on these parameters 30 years ago, but now turn it into red and yellow and etc. So that means we are moving away from our healthy way of eating and getting into bad eating habits. As much as this is good, bad, but in line with what we are trying to achieve through our agricultural innovation and bioeconomy, I think probably it could also open markets for Africa, considering now the world is moving into a more healthy way of eating. That could provide a lot of opportunity, as much as it is a bad thing that we need to reverse. Looking into the overall dietary pattern, this is very different from 30 years ago. This is in 2010, where almost the whole world has a lot of change in consumption patterns. Those countries who had a bad habit have a significant improvement in a positive way, and then those countries who were relatively good have changed it in a negative way. As a result, I think if we were to talk about food consumption patterns, we need to analyze those patterns and change of those patterns if we were to really introduce a healthy way of eating and livelihood. This is for comparison. This is 1990. This is 2010. You could clearly see a few years, 30 years down the line, Africa has significantly moved on a negative scale in terms of the consumption of unhealthy food. This is a photograph I took in 2019, in July 2019 in Limpopo, to see how diverse is our food system and does it really support a diverse food index, as well as does it influence our food value chain? Not always. I think when I visited this village, I found in this grandmother's backyard homestead gardens about 17 different vegetable food items, from onions and chilies and various types of green beans and okra and cowpeas and tomatoes and chilies, you name it. So perhaps working into a good way of eating could probably start in developing our homestead gardens and promote our indigenous way of farming. I'll quickly go through some of the interventions that ARC is doing in terms of promoting without necessarily really removing what is available for us on the table. With amaranth, I think we could arguably say that we have covered a lot of ground. We have introduced quite a number of accessions. We have evaluated them. We had participatory evaluations. We have identified a few varieties that can be promoted, as well as on the high end of science. I think we were successfully also sequenced the full genome for leafy amaranth. The platform for breeding is set, as well as I think we are developing some processing technologies that could go hand in hand. With cowpea and bambara, we work towards supplementing plant-based protein. We all know how unhealthy animal proteins are and how expensive they are becoming. And therefore, we are really advocating a lot in the consumption of plant-based protein, both in the form of mixed cropping with cereals and staples, as well as the importance of expanding it more to include other legumes such as chickpea and pigeon pea and etc. So that is as far as our leguminous vegetables are concerned. We are also working on okra. This is probably one of the most important vegetables that is underutilized in South Africa. It contributes to intestinal health and sugar metabolism, in the process mitigating risk of diabetics as well as cholesterol and cancer. There is enough records that it is rich in vitamin A, C, and K, minerals, antioxidants, and folates. As much as its availability is very limited, what is worrying is that when it is available, it's very expensive. Sometimes more than 30 rand for 250 gram or something of okra pods. We have, however, covered significant characterization work, and we have more than 60 accessions that we have introduced from the Asian Vegetables Research Center, and hopefully with public perception changing. I think that's the biggest problem in South Africa is because of the sliminess of okra. I think the public perception is one of the hindrances in promoting this crop, and we would hope to change that. The other aspect of our work is to also look into alternative starch staples. We know we rely heavily on sweet potato, maize, and wheat products, but from health as well as from diversification point of view, I think we are looking into developing amadumbe. We know amadumbe is one of those very high hypoglycemic index root crops because it releases sugar very slow metabolism in your body. It's very different from other starch sources, so it's probably the healthier option when it comes to eating. With cassava, it's largely for import substitution for the starch industry as well as household food security, because it is a very climate resilient crop, as well as if we expand this crop by replacing the maize and potato that goes into the starch industry, we could also hope that we could contribute positively to the food price inflation, as well as creating a conducive livelihood for the rural economy. This is, however, not to say that we ignore the other staples. Probably our main flagship project is our sweet potato program. We focus on breeding, farmer support, production system training, as well as agro-processing. We cover all across the value chain of this crop, from germplasm management all the way to product development, school nutrition, training, as well as industry support in terms of providing improved planting stock. With potato, I think we are largely focused on developing superior varieties, as well as trying to positively influence the seed system, because the seed is one of the key cost drivers in the potato industry, in addition to the stringent regulatory requirements, because you would need more than 160,000 rand per hectare to produce potato using the model that is being used by the commercial farmer. So development of low-cost production technology and affordable system are non-negotiable needs, which we hope to achieve as we are working largely on it. I think, unfortunately, it's parallel with this session, but you could also see in your program note that the city of Tshwane are also developing for small-scale farmer seed programs. We have provided them with mini tubers and all the technical support that is required through our potato breeding and crop development team. So we are actively playing in that space to try and positively influence as well as reduce the cost of production of potatoes so that smallholder farmers can afford it, because for an industry more than 9 billion value, the less than 0.2% contribution of and role players or black farmers, I think is not a very good thing that we could be proud of. I think that is a figure we must really work to change. We also work on community engagements through various means. I think through our training programs, through our various funded projects, especially the school nutrition program is our very popular program where we develop school gardens. This is precisely done in conjunction with the crop development research. I think it's also very critical to positively influence consumption patterns, because with children, you can easily change perceptions, and they are also very receptive compared to adults. As the saying goes, you can't teach an old dog a new trick. So it's easier to really influence children, and that way we can influence society at large. But what are the understanding and steps South Africa needs to have to effect positive change on food consumption pattern? Because is doing all sort of research alone enough? In our opinion, we believe it is not, because we need to look into our food system components. Is it sustainable? Is it accessible? Is it diverse? Is it participatory? Is it affordable? Is it evenly distributed in space and time? Is our food system health conscious? Do we have a strong research support that goes into the food production? Do we have a strong policy that underpins how we produce, distribute food, etc.? So one needs to have this in a very balanced place for a nation's food system to be in a good space. One way of improving food system and nutrition value chain is the broadening of the food basket. The food basket, in a nutshell, is the quantity and diversity of food products that any country or community or grocery store, even on your handbag, as you leave your food stores, what you have in your bag is what is defined as a food basket. An ideal national food basket should provide both the nutrition as well as a year-round availability, because both access, availability, and nutrition are important. Unfortunately, in our case in South Africa, I think there is a lot of consumption of energy-dense foods, your maize, your bread, your potatoes, stuff like that. These are, as much as they are energy-intensive, they are very not nutrient-dense. So the balance is critical. This is where we believe our indigenous crops can play a big role, and hence we need to look into the ways to broaden the food base by effectively exploiting the indigenous food biodiversity that we have. How do we go about it? I think we need to diversify, but when we diversify, we need to have a very good vehicle to promote new crops, as well as we need to learn to overcome cultural challenges and eating habits. For example, if you were to give mopane worm to someone in northern or central or eastern Africa, probably that person would run to the bathroom to vomit. On the similar reaction we have seen when South Africans are given a food made from okra because of its slimy nature. So these are culturally, none of them are right or wrong. Well, I'm not trying to say that this is what it is, but at some point we need to have to change in terms of our perception and culture to food. That is the only way we could expand our eating habits. Equally important is we diversify in terms of our nutrient intake. Instead of relying on animal products, for example, like South Africa is, I think we need to expand plant-based proteins, both from health as well as from economic point of view. One also needs to cater for health options in the production system. For example, we do a lot of biofortification breeding, precisely because we need to introduce some nutrients into our starch staples. For example, we have the vitamin A-rich sweet potatoes now largely and widely used throughout the country. Similar approaches can be done on other crops, as well as adopting crops that are already rich in nutrients. We need to also reduce consumption of animal-based products, which is a big risk in South Africa. That is why we work and we promote for the adoption of indigenous food systems. Access to markets, means and modes of production, as I have said in my previous, the introductory slide, is also equally important. This is because we need to develop alternative markets. Some indigenous crops could not be developed into commodity, largely because of entry problem to markets. Most people, for example, live in South Africa in urban areas. Developing alternative market could also be a very important economic driver when it comes to economic beneficiation. Also, we need to look into the current food market, which is prohibitively regulated and very, very strong in terms of its barrier to entry for low-income part of the society. We need to facilitate entry to new role players. I think that is very important through training or technology development or provision of low-cost technologies and et cetera, et cetera. Diversification of agricultural commodities is where we can play in terms of expanding our means and modes of production. Try new commodities. Invest on product diversification and processing. For example, cassava is a good example. By simply introducing cassava, you are not only addressing food nutrition security in rural areas, you're creating jobs, you are also providing raw material for the starch industry and other industrial products that come from cassava, as well as substituting import. So those are some of the considerations we need to make. In terms of access to markets and means of production, I think farmer training will have a lot of role to play. So we need to be very strong in those spaces. And I think those are some of the things that we do as ARC to achieve that. Promote the production of homestead gardens. In my slide from Limpopo, I've demonstrated the homestead garden of that grandmother that I had visited 2 years ago. Ideally, I think that would be where we need to go. That is why I always promote that in South Africa. I think advocating big is not the way to go, in my opinion. I think we need so many smaller initiatives that would bring a lot of change in society. We also need to develop economic crops, such as medicinal plants, because this perception that you have to produce food to be food secure is not always true, because if your wallet is full, I think you can also be food secure. So I think South Africa is well gifted in terms of its natural product resources, especially plant-based natural products. So this can be developed into plant-based natural product markets, and industries can be expanded. This is relatively untapped. Unfortunately, all of the raw material is being shipped to America, France, Germany, and other parts of the world. So if we were to develop that industry locally, I think it would contribute a lot to the local economy, as well as in terms of creating jobs and economic emancipation. These pictures, I put them to demonstrate to you it is doable. For example, you see our semi-commercial evaluation of amaranth, as well as the African ginger. This African ginger, you know, in most of respiratory medicines, this is an ingredient, and it's almost extinct. You will never find it in the field anymore because of wild harvesting. But we have reestablished the crop as a commercial crop now. You could plant several hectares of it, and it fetches a lot of money. I'm telling you, you will be more profitable by planting African ginger than any other agricultural crop. My second to last slide, I think it's not feasible to always also expect the private sector to provide solution. I strongly believe that I think the states have a lot of role to play, especially in terms of developing effective and affordable systems for our indigenous, for local crops. The private seed companies are focusing on a few other commodities, but the indigenous crops are not really looked after. We need to equip existing community seed banks. Many nutrient-dense indigenous crops does not even have a seed system. That is an area that is open for investment one need to look into. I think we also need to develop a seed system precisely to allow upscaling. If you don't have a seed system, even if you know a crop is nutritious, if somebody says, okay, I like this thing, I want to plant 1,000 hectares, that's where you're stuck, because you don't even have any seed material to provide for upscaling. As breeders, also, we believe that we need to focus on breeding open pollinated varieties that are adaptable to rain-fed agriculture, as well as farmers could actually have the benefit of farm-saved seed for utilization, so that the cost of production is mitigated. I'm a big advocate of the fact that government must own and fund crop and animal development research. I think it is done in more than 80% of the countries in the world, precisely because once it is national public goods and asset, if the state funds it, whatever technology that comes out of it can be available and accessible to those who cannot afford to buy R&D products. Therefore, I think if we were to make justice to the food value chain and food system in South Africa, I think the best place to start would be for government to take ownership of funding of food, animal and crop development research, and invest on water harvesting infrastructure, whether it's a mega, micro, or macro dams, because we know water is one of the limiting factors, as well as that would allow us to focus on diversification if we have all those other factors are looked after. Favorable policies are not non-negotiable, of course. We need to relook into our national R&D priorities, support programs, and allocation of funding. Where do we really invest our money? We need to develop sustainable R&D funding framework. Currently, we don't have this. I remember in December 2018 or 19, during the national Research Plenary, the Director General of the then Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, did initiate this process to develop a national funding model for agriculture that still is something that South Africa doesn't have. There was also a commitment in some 20 years ago, which is normally called the Maputo Declaration, where African countries pledged to commit certain percentage of GDP for agricultural R&D. One of the countries who did not implement that is South Africa. So that is an area that needs to be attended to. We need to define what influences and determines our agriculture policy. I say this because sometimes it's very common these days to see a lot of initiatives that are geared towards making some individuals rich. You trying to make a black farmer, etc. But I struggle to see the morality of using a taxpayer's money to make an individual rich. And instead, are we not better off using that money and invest it on the public good that would bring a holistic change to society? So I think in our policy, I think we need to have a look as well. So I think we need to focus on household food security. That's a very good place to start, and create stable and vibrant rural livelihood. I'm a big advocate of this because this is the only way you can really have peace in Johannesburg and Pretoria, because then you can mitigate migration to cities. I think with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an interesting presentation, Dr. Bairu. So now I think we have had all presentations coming in, interesting presentations, connected presentations. I think a number of issues were touched. If I can start with the first presentation, they talked about, we have malnutrition, we have wasting, and we have obesity problems, and we need to resolve all that. But then we have food safety issues. That talk is the food that we are eating safe from chemicals, from pathogens, and what innovations need to be done to curb that. Then broadening the food base through indigenous and our local genetic resources, our indigenous crops and animals, our biodiversity. So for now, I'll open the session for clarification, questions, discussion points. I don't know, Prof. Maiwashe, Dr. Venter, do you have questions coming from your side? Then I'll also raise questions that are coming from the general and from my side. Prof. Maiwashe. We can't hear you at this. Maybe I'm muted. Yes.
Thank you, Farai, for just summarizing what we have listened to. It is a lot of ground has been covered. I just want to ask a question, and it's just a couple of questions, but I would want to start with the last presentation. There was mention of broadening the food basket by looking at the indigenous vegetables. It seems that, and this message was also echoed in the presentation, that we seem to be moving away from indigenous systems to more commoditized kind of foods. And I would want to hear from Dr. Bairu to say, what is it that we can do to be able to get the indigenous, maybe food and veg to enter the mainstream? Because it seems that consumption is driven mainly by what we're getting from commercial agriculture, with a very minimal contribution by the smallholder sector. Dr. Bairu, if you can just give this a second bite.
Thank you, Prof. Maiwashe. I think you hit the message home. That is very true. That is why now what we always speak about, creating the alternative market. You see, we are so quick. I'm not trying to be negative, but I sometimes feel that the regulatory mechanisms, especially those that have to do with safety, are highly used to really prevent entry of certain commodities. For example, people, they do go and do samples and they say we found this bacteria, this kind of organisms from informal markets, and therefore there is so much effort and scientific approach to discourage those informal markets, but there is not formal approach to promote them and bring them to mainstream agriculture or to mainstream food markets. What we are trying to do, for example, what we did with Amaranth was that with the communities that we have worked with, we have tried to link them up with possible markets. For example, our KZN community participatory farmers, we link them up with Boxer so that whenever they grow Amaranth, they have an offtake agreement with Boxer so that they have once or twice, they harvest as a group and then they hand over to Boxer, and then the bunches are then proudly sat next to your spinach and lettuce and etc., and that's sold. The other way we are looking at is also that we also are introducing processing and drying mechanism, because these indigenous crops, especially the leafy ones, are very perishable. And therefore, we have introduced a system of solar drying tools so that the nutrition should not be influenced. I think that is bringing a lot of market. For example, we have been asked last year to plant, I don't know, about 50 hectares or something of amaranth, because a company called Scale Impact was buying those powders, flowers of amaranth and exporting them to Europe and etc. So it's how you diversify the market. But importantly, I think it is, whenever I go to farmers, Prof. Mawasha, what I say to farmers is that there is this obsession with markets. I think we need to move away from it. It's in itself is becoming a barrier of entry in our mind. The moment you bring in a new technology, the first thing they ask you is that, do I have a market? And my answer to them is that first, feed your family, produce, secure your household food need. When you have a surplus product, that is where we would think about the market. And in the process, I think we won't ignore, but on the background, you work on the market. But we need to really influence the perception of the farmer to focus more on the production without dwelling too much on the market and then using that excuse to stay away from producing the food in the first place. So some of the pictures you have seen, those street vendors and etc., I think they need support. A sample example, in Limpopo, in Mpumalanga, and in Limpopo and in KZN, they are very good examples. The Provincial Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, they have built this nice kiosk looking like concrete structures where these rural informal traders, they would go sit and sell their products, and when they finish, they can lock them up and go. Or they also pack their product and take it home and etc. So we need to invest in those kind of informal trade so that also the money circulates, and that's how economic prosperity also gets. I think from those three angles, one from linking them to markets, the processing aspect, as well as investing on local production, consumption, and trading. I think those three aspects are what I would like to propose in a nutshell. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Maybe one last question from my side, if time still allows. If you look at our food system and the value chains, we do have short value chains and also long value chains. And it was quite interesting to hear the survey that has been done on food pathogens by Dr. Matle and the team, that there are high levels of food pathogens that are being picked up in our processing value chain. And this was on the commercial side of things. I was quite surprised, which then suggests that the situation might even be a little more dire when you go to the smallholder agriculture. And if you were to put this at a continental level, whereby a whole lot of our food comes from smallholder agriculture with a good contribution from commercial agriculture, I would want to hear some thoughts from the three speakers that talked on food safety. That is, the first one is around the new technologies to try and deal with the issue of food safety. This is the new research on nano sensors. I would want to hear a little more from Dr. Dlamini and also from Dr. Moephuli, just to check if we have done a similar work in terms of the short value chains where food or food is produced and consumed having gone through short value chains, which is very characteristic of the continent. And I would also want to get some thoughts from Dr. Fletch around the issue of mycotoxins and how it is a challenge, especially in short value chains.
Thank you, Prof, for the question. In terms of the nano sensors to assess or to help with food safety, there are some technologies that have been developed that detect some gases. Like we're working with our chemicals cluster, where we're developing actually the technology has been developed. Now it's ready to be tried out, especially with big silos. They are not meant, well, not that they can't be used for for small scale producers for now, but they are ready to be tried out in terms of the trying out. But there are technologies that can be used. And in terms of the packaging that I mentioned, the CSIR has developed a technology for packaging fresh fruits. And that packaging is bioactive because it releases some nanoparticles that sort of delay the ripening and also delay spoilage. So they've got antimicrobial properties. So it limits the need to use plastic or other preservatives that may affect the food particles because they are natural. They are from food plants. They are extracted from those. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can also hear from Dr. Moephuli and also Dr. Fletch.
Thank you, Prof. Regarding the short value chain, there hasn't been much of work done to determine the occurrence of foodborne pathogens there. However, another research group in our building, they did do a work on salmonella contamination level and short value chain. And the prevalence was about 8% higher than the one that we found on long food value chain. But in a broad sense, there hasn't been much done. And this is primarily by the fact that in informal or short value chain, there is no funding that wants to investigate, is put to investigate food safety in those aspects. And there are no regulation as well to go into that space. To go into that space. So that is the reason why there's not been too much work done on that space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Fletch?
Professor Mawashi, doesn't seem if Professor Fletch is on the call anymore.
Okay, so Farai, with your indulgence, one last question for Prof. Hetty.
Okay, sure.
Prof. Hetty, the general public knows very little about the nutritional content, especially of animal products. And I know there are discussions about product labeling, especially including the nutrition content. will you care to comment about this? Because I think in terms of animal products, it's very, very important that the general public should know the different nutrients that we get from from the animal products, and maybe also your experience from what is being done internationally on the same subject.
Yes, I think there's a misconception that South Africans are eating too much meat. In every population, there is, of course, a normal bell curve. But a curve that, yes, true, some people are, but it's a minority of the population that was consuming too much animal products. And according to our calculations, we are actually consuming less than the 90 grams that is per day that is prescribed as part of our food-based dietary guidelines. Now, we know that the animal foods are a very important source of vitamin B12, and that you cannot obtain that from a plant-based diet alone. So it is an essential nutrient that is only found in animal food products. Then animal food products, of course, also contribute to vitamin B6 intake, protein, iron, and zinc. And as I mentioned earlier, iron and zinc and vitamin A are three nutrients of concern in the diet of countries such as our own, and particularly on the African continent and East Asia. So there's definitely a huge role to play for animal-sourced foods in moderation within a balanced diet. And I think that is what we all aim for, is to have a little bit of everything to be able to attain what we require. We know, for instance, that dairy products provide very bioavailable calcium for bone and teeth, bone growth and maintenance, and for your teeth to develop and to be maintained. So I think you know, there is a role to play for plant-based protein, very much so. But I think that it's also very important that animal foods is also recognized as being part of a balanced food basket. So yes, currently, according to legislation, all packaged food should be labeled with the key 7 nutrients, which include, of course, the salt content of it, but the Department of Health has been engaging with scientists now for quite some period to look at front of packaging labeling to enable consumers to make a more informed choice, because consumers actually don't bother to read all the ingredients. They just pick it up and go. And more research is telling us, you know, speak to the consumer in a language that he would understand and can easily translate into the daily diet. So thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, Prof. Dr. Sonia, do you have any questions before we close up our session?
Yes, thank you so much for all the interesting presentations on a very important topic. I just want to ask a general question, maybe to all the speakers, and anyone can chip in. I think we have, if we look at nutrition in general, the paradox between over and under nutrition and the challenges that we face in the world around that, and what should our interventions broadly be to address both these very important issues. Specifically, if we look at the current pandemic and the role that immune systems play with regards to being a healthy human being, And food definitely plays a key and a critical role in that. And then also the other question is, if we look at the fact that our food prices are increasing, which now also leads to the fact that poverty increased, and also we are seeing now an increase in nutrient deficits in our population and the ability of people to have access to the right nutrients. What are in general our recommendations to have a balance in terms of our food supply, but also the food safety around it? If we look at our informal systems, the access might not be a problem, but the safety may be a concern there. So maybe a few inputs and views on these specific matters.
Okay, thank you. So can we start with Prof. Hatim and then Dr. Bairu, then Dlamini, Matle, and Fletch?
Yes, thank you. I think what is very true is, first of all, that consumers don't inherently know today what is a balanced diet. And I think that is why it's very important to start at preschool level already to include basic information about healthy food choices into the curriculum so that children will know how to make food choices in an informed manner. We also, like Michael Baru, would like to support the fact that we can encourage back gardening to complement diets, because we know that harvesting in the field to a large extent has extinguished many of our indigenous food products that was readily available. So thank you. I will leave it. I see we have only 4 minutes left.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. I think before I give the other speakers just a few minutes to, so as you answer the question from Dr. Fenter, maybe if you just give 30 seconds to 1 minute closing remarks, and we start with Dr. Bayu.
Thank you. I think my take-home message would be, I think we need to aspire to have a balance on what we do, because there's nothing that is universally correct and there's nothing that's universally wrong in most of our food system. That is number one. I think we need to get the right balance. We must also should not undermine the urban farming and the little green things that we throw in our gardens, their contribution to our health as well as to our food system. So is, I think, also the promotion of household food and nutrition security as opposed to a market and processing and driven kind of agriculture. At this point, I would like to suggest that I think we need into a household food security based kind of economic policy that we need to drive. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. For me, my closing remarks is that there is a need for us to also look at foodborne pathogen from as a link to humans, because what we discover or what we isolate from food does not necessarily translate into disease in humans. So there has to be that link between what we found in food and in human, and that link will help us to really prioritize which foodborne pathogens are of importance in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Dlamini.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I think you've said everything. For me, my take-home message is that food safety starts from the farm all the way to the consumer. And as a consumer, you should also recognize that actually a food safety issue may arise even in your kitchen. For example, if you process raw meats and mix it with your salads, you might get cross-contamination. And as Dr. Maja has just said, that sometimes finding isolating the organism does not necessarily translate to disease, but yes, we should note that it is very important. And also nutrition doesn't even have to start very far. It's in your back garden where you can grow a few vegetables and have nutrition. Thank you. Thank you all. I'll stop there.
Okay, so on behalf of the organizers for this session, I would really want to thank you, the panelists, for a very informing, interesting discussion and comprehensive discussion. I think we touched quite a broad area around food systems, nutrition, safety, and security. I think we also saw in our presentation, or had in our presentations, so many gaps around managing the challenges around food safety and nutritional safety. We also saw, managing how do we broaden our food base whilst it's an opportunity, but there are challenges. I think considering that majority of those where the potential for broadening the food base is with the smallholder communal sector. So how do we tap into that potential? And development of products, I think I see it as an option or a channel to make sure that we have enough food across geographical space and times, manage the seasonality and all that. And maybe, I think when Dr. Bairo was talking about okra and mopani worms and perceptions, I was thinking, how can we use product development actually to manage those perceptions and to ensure eating of the broad range of food types that we have. Some of the discussions, the answers we had in this session, but I also see in the program that we have sessions around smallholder agriculture and how to enable it, to promote it, which might also help answer the points that were raised in here. There's also another session on technological innovations for resilient agriculture. So we should actually make an effort today after the plenary sessions to log in and be part of those sessions, as they will enable us to actually complete, maybe be near completion in terms of our discussions around food security, nutrition, and safety. So thank you so much and have a good day and stay logged on. So coming up, we are going into our plenary session. There are 2 plenary sessions between 1 and 2 and 3. So we should be able to hear more within the convention. Have a good day.